Live.
Hello,
Okay.
what's up, world?
Hey, welcome back. It's been
We're
a
back.
minute. Yeah, yeah. So, so, kind of in preparing for today, Susie and I had a little bit of a text conversation. Um, I had I had wanted to kind of take a deeper look at at woman in the Genesis 3 narrative. And the question I wanted to ask was, is there such thing as, if there's toxic masculinity, is there such thing as toxic femininity? And um, one of the things I was noticing in Genesis 3 is really kind of, both Genesis 3 and 4,
Mm-hmm.
there's the woman sort of kind of comes to front stage, and Adam sort of goes to backstage in the text, right? He sort of almost kind of disappears a little bit in the narrative, and 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 at the and so we were exploring, like, kind of this question of why is that, right? Like, what is going on? What is the text trying to say to us? And then, but at the same time, we see that there's these consequences for what woman did, because what she did was a negative, right? And so my thought was, in the same way that we would kind of talk about toxic masculinity, I've actually got like DVDs on my shelf that are named such things, right? Like, so it's out
Okay,
there,
what are they named? Like
like
toxic.
toxic masculinity. Like
Really?
I've gone to workshops at CCDA about toxic masculinity.
Hmm.
So from where I come from, that's like a phrase that's out there. And I was kind of thinking about one of the privileges of the privileged, is actually, um, the the high level of examination that is on the privileged person. So um, the way I would kind of illustrate that, I was not the greatest basketball player in the world, right? And I remember trying out for the team, and I specifically, in my junior and senior year, I didn't make the team, because we had a different coach, and our new coach, his his priority as a coach, um, was to find two or three players and invest all his time and energy in basically making them stars, right? And and so what ends up, if you're in that role, you get the very critical coaching eye, right? Like, that is really examining you. And it's in some ways it's more rigorous and it's harder, right? But in another way, it's a privilege, because you you're getting the benefit of criticism. Basically, there's a benefit to criticism when it's constructive criticism, right? The disadvantage, obviously, the hard part of it is but you're the one who gets the ball, though, right? You're the one who gets the ball, and you are told that what you do matters, right? If you're on the bench, if you're not that privileged person, if you're on the bench, you know, people don't care as much how well you do. They throw you in for 2 minutes and, hey, good job, right? But the investment is not in you. And so one of the things I'm noticing in the text is, all of a sudden the text, kind of the camera goes from Adam to woman, right? And God kind of really goes after woman, right? And he goes after the serpent in terms of the woman, the offspring of the woman, right? And so if the only text we had for the world literature was Genesis 3, and we didn't know any other history and what happens after this, you would say like the woman seems to be almost preeminent now in this narrative. And it was kind of, what was interesting was we kind of saw the same thing in the first 4 chapters of Exodus, right? And so what I wanted to do is kind of ask the question this way: is there such a thing as toxic femininity? And by looking at that, right, like if toxic masculinity is X, then the opposite of that is healthy masculinity, right? So that was where I was coming from with it.
Thank you for
but
explaining that.
yeah.
Because I didn't understand why you were using the phrase toxic femininity. And so I felt some toxic stuff coming from like deep within.
right. And so when Susie gave that pushback, I was like, well, maybe we should just talk about that. Like where is that coming from? Right. And Susie, I think offline you've shared a little bit more of your story with me, and so I just really wanted to let you kind of break down why you were like, I hate both these words. I hate toxic masculinity. I hate, right. And just hear your perspective on it, because I think it'd be incredibly insightful for us.
Can I say something before you go, Susie? Can I just say something like a preface? I mean, I believe that anything that can be healthy can also be sick.
Yes.
Anything. If there is a definition of health for anything, that's a reference. So that means the numbers can alter and it can be sick. So masculinity can be sick. And one of the ways we define sick masculinity is toxic, right? I don't like the word too because of the way people use it, but I understand where people are coming from because there's really, really sick masculinity, right? But in the same way too, femininity can be healthy and it can also be sick. That's why I actually believe that it's humanity in its entirety that is sick.
Right.
And that is what Jesus Christ came to fix. Both man and woman, both masculine, feminine. That's what Jesus came to fix because we were sick. Everything was out of order, after the fall. And that's why Jesus Christ had to come so that he can actually restore us back to health.
Yes.
So that's why I believe that any construct that is human, anything that is humanity can be sick, can be toxic. You want to use toxic, can be, any word that you want to use. So that is why it is not, it might not be PC to talk about it, but I think that if we are going to be sincere, there are healthy men, healthy women, and there's, healthy masculines and healthy feminines, but there are also sick feminines and sick masculines. So that's why we got to talk about it from the Bible. I think that's one of the reasons for this podcast. We try to go by the word. We try to be real about things. Yeah. So that's what I want to say.
No, that's good. And I 100% agree. And so for me, when toxic femininity was being used, I didn't, the words toxic masculinity weren't being used. And so it was just, the focus was just toxic femininity. And I thought, wait a minute. What? Who's defining? Well, first of all, as a spiritual coach, I try not to create these labels for people, right? Where you are toxic, right? Or the way you are thinking is so our ideology, the way we see things and the way we teach others. So as Scott was talking about his coach, teaching those three people, right? Sometimes in humanity, we don't have good coaches, right? Oh, we just lost Scott. Oh, okay. Anyway, we don't have good coaches.
I'm still here. I'm getting a charger. So
Right.
sorry.
That are teaching us how to see each other in ways where we are honoring each other, where I don't see myself as superior to another human being. And so when it comes to, when I think of toxic, as you guys are talking about it, toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, I think that is, let's talk about it. Let's unpack it, because there is a lot there. I don't want to have, because I'm in a different culture and I say that something is toxic, another woman in another culture might not think that that's toxic, right? She might think that that is an honorable way to live, right? So that's so anyway, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I actually prefer to use the term like unhealthy, healthy masculinity or unhealthy femininity.
Yeah.
Because when you think of toxic, you are talking about the way you experience it.
Right.
When you say something is toxic, it's the way you experience it, and it's very self-centered. And if you are not careful, when you use that word, anything that you don't like about a feminine, you say it's toxic. Men do that with their wives. They'll be like, you're not whatever, because of their own experience, but because of their own insecurities. And the same thing with women too. If it is based on how you experience it, then it could be based on your own preferences. But I think that we have definitions in the Bible of what a healthy masculine should be. I mean, as healthy masculinity should be, which is Christ-like. And we have definitions in the Bible what healthy femininity should be, which is Christ-like, which is not subjective. It is objective. It's not based on how you are experiencing it at the moment, right? But based on how God defines it. So that is why I'm a CCDA, all the person, but that's why sometimes some of those conversations make me uncomfortable, because a lot of things are very subjective, based on somebody's experience at the moment. And then you can label anybody anything.
Yes.
If it is not objective based on scriptures.
Yeah.
And I think like so if you watch a video on toxic masculinity, it's gonna usually show music videos. It's gonna show the way women are portrayed in relationship to men in our popular culture. And a lot of times the case will be made like most violent crime is done by men, right? And so kind of the reason they use the word toxic, I think, is I think toxic connotes the same thing as poison, right? So an unhealthy person is one thing, but a poisonous person is going to hurt everybody around them, right? And so I do think there is a place for that kind of language in terms of if the narrative about what is masculine and what is feminine becomes corrupted, it is poisonous to the culture that accepts that narrative, right? And so that's where I would.
Can I push back on that? There's a proverb, and I think Susie said something like that too earlier. One man's poison is another man's food. There's a statement like that. For example, what you think is poisonous in a culture, in one culture, it's not poisonous in another culture. So that is why I mean, I'm not, this is just a very nice conversation, not a major disagreement.
It's very nice. I'm holding my hands down here.
It's just semantics. But
I'm not entertained.
but I just think that, for example, use the word racist.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good topic. Let's go.
Understand? Anything that you use to label people, you can use it as a weapon.
Yes.
If you don't like how the person behaves.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
You can use it as a weapon. And good people have been attacked as racist.
Mm-hmm.
And racist people have been called non-racist just because the guy or the person did something that you like. So that is why I like objective stuff like that, subjective stuff that is based on how people look at it. But it's just a friendly disagreement. But I understand that, what we're talking about is very important. And what you mean by toxic masculinity or femininity is an important thing that we need to discuss. It's just that little nuance, for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I have been called toxic because doing institution or systemic racism work and oppressive work in places that I worked, where I had an employer, I had pastors, over me. And when I have tried to have discussions and bring attention to racist situations, and it wasn't listened to, then I would bring it up again. Right. And then, I would have to bring it up again a month later, a year later. I'm still bringing up the same thing. And the people that don't want to listen, they're going to call that toxic. And that's very unhealthy, especially when it comes to oppression. Right. So that's another reason why it struck a chord within me. It's like, okay, well, why do you think femininity is toxic? Right. Because I know why they thought I was toxic. And it's and I was silenced. And also, when a man uses the term and maybe uses a description of toxic femininity, that is historical. That has damaged women. That is the common thread throughout history. It has been men using phrases or words to describe toxic femininity so that they can put women in their place. And so when I think of toxic masculinity, or a man saying those words, it's like, I'm tired of hearing men talk about toxic femininity. Like, they shouldn't even be talking about toxic femininity, right? And women, we don't have to use toxic masculinity. We can be very specific and say, this is where this is how you are oppressing women with your decisions, with your behavior, with your words, right? And I think that, and we're going to go back to the coach that you were talking about. If the coach is, let's say, just focusing on those three people, right? And not just, but primarily focusing on those three people. How, and let's say he has some masculinity, let's say, that is toxic. Let's just say, and he's not just coaching basketball, but he's coaching life. Like, this is how you speak to someone. This is how you speak to someone. This is, there. Let me see. How do I say this? We can. Those three people are they're not going to see him as toxic if they have this honor and this respect for him. They're going to probably eat up everything that he says, right? And so here are these kids learning from this coach, and how am I going to call these kids now toxic when, I mean, even though there might be some really bad things in that coaching, you know, I need to look at those kids. I need to look at how did they get to that place to be the men that they are now and treating women the way they are. Right. And so there are so many nuances that we need to look at. We need to step back and say, okay, well, how did we get to this place, versus just looking at situations and say, okay, this is toxic. We need to ask, well, how are we defining toxic? How did we get to this point? What are all the ideologies and cultural understandings that are in the room at the same time? So I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh,
Yes, it does.
it makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of why I wanted you to speak on it, because I the more I do this podcast and like really get into the text, it's really in the nuance that it's actually super important, right? Like what God created us male and female purposefully, right? And we have this kind of purposeful complementary creation where nobody is preeminent. Like nobody can say, I don't need the other. And nobody is self-sufficient, right? Like God created it that way. And what seems to me to happen a lot of times is we don't go deep enough into the text, right, to really look at what is masculine in the image of God and what is feminine in the image of God, right? And that's kind of what I want to look at, and sort of what I think the text gives to us is like this very profound little story that's very brief, but is so profound in what we can bring out of it. It gives us what it should be and what the enemy tries to turn it towards, right? Because the enemy wants to pervert what is good, right? And so by looking at how the enemy tries to pervert something helps you understand what the healthy version of it is supposed to be, right? Mm-hmm. And now we have a ruler from Scripture, at least as best as we can try to, right? Like we're human and we bring all our stuff to the text, but as best as we can try to, we now have a ruler that can help us understand what God's purpose for masculine and feminine is, right?
And that's what I mean by objectivity.
Yeah.
And I think too that there have been throughout time many teachers of the Bible that have taught things that were too masculine. And so that is a constant issue when anybody is preaching the Bible as a woman. It's a man preaching, and sometimes even a woman. I need to have a lens. Who was their teacher? Where are they getting this information from? I mean, that's why we have so many translations, right? Because there are people that have picked up the original text and said, oh yeah, women should definitely be in this position. And then, other people saying, wait, no, that doesn't, in the whole context of the Bible and, the way things play out in Revelation, that doesn't seem right. That just seems evil. So, there's that piece too.
Right. But which is why I think kind of like really kind of trying to, I mean, as best we can, like we're fallible, but like as best we can, kind of really get. I like one of my heroes, Michael Heiser. His podcast called the Naked Bible Podcast, right? Like it's this idea, like not what did your system teach you, right? But let's let the text push back on what our
System taught you?
what our biases were coming into it, right?
Does he encourage you to examine the system you came from?
Yeah.
He passed away earlier this year, right?
Yeah. But I think more his thing is that there's kind of like principles to exegesis that a lot of times what people are trying to do is they have a system that they're trying to prove rather than using like good literary exegesis about what the text is actually saying to that sometimes will mess with your system, right? It'll like mess with, this kind of simple system that you're trying to use to see the whole Bible, right? And a lot of times, like the Naked Bible will push back against that, right? And what's been fascinating to me is
so pushes back against the context, the whole context of the Bible.
No, pushes back against the system. So, like if you take Calvinism, right? Calvinism has a certain way it wants this overarching theme it wants to see in Scripture, right? But occasionally you're going to run into scriptures that don't fit in that system,
right?
You can go the other way with it too, and then you bump into stuff that's like, I don't know, this doesn't fit in my system. If you try to figure out end time stuff, premillennial, all that kind of stuff, people try to develop these systems and then these theological systems, and then there's text that just kind of pushes hard back against it, and that's the moment of truth for you, right? The moment of truth is when my assumptions about what is right, what is wrong, what is God's perspective, the text is sort of confronting that and not agreeing with that, right? And then creating this tension that I have to sort of resolve somehow, right? And then we're trying to resolve it. And I think it's interesting actually that God gives us this book that creates discussion, right? It's almost like he doesn't, like he could just say, this is the way it is, like, XYZ, like, and every time you're wondering as a church, what roles are supposed to be or what everything's supposed to be, I'm going to send you a letter from heaven by an angel, and they're going to deliver it to you, the precise orders. It's like God doesn't do that. He gives us this book that wasn't even written to us and says, figure it out. Like, I gave you a brain, I gave you my spirit, like, do your best to figure it out, right? And then he seems to like stand back and let us blow it. I mean, like for centuries, he'll let us blow it, it seems like, like you think about what Martin Luther was up against, right? And, God let that happen. He let this doctrine of, of works and all this kind of stuff happen, right? And so that's just interesting to me. So like, I'm coming at this with the humility to understand, like, I might not agree with Scott Parker today, 2 years from now. I might not agree with what I'm seeing in the text today, 2 years from now, when I have more information, right? I'm old enough to have that humility, right? Like, I've changed my mind so many times, right? But as best we can, as this group, trying to get to the core of what is this text saying, and I think for me that the interesting observation I've had as we pursued this podcast is how exalted the role of woman is in the narrative, right? And that's why I call it roles of women in the biblical narrative, right? Because we always argue about roles of women in the church, and it's like, well, I don't think the Bible is primarily telling us these stories to figure out who can preach or not preach and where they can preach or not preach, right? There's much deeper stuff that, because at the end of the day, you're only gonna have 2 or 3 preachers in a church anyways, right? Like it's like not everybody. It's a minority that always have leadership positions. It's not usually a majority that have the leadership positions. So at the end of the day, most of us, most of the time, are not in the leadership position, right? Like, and so most of Scripture is written to help us out with our everyday life and attitudes, outside of our, our roles in the church, right? And I think, showing up in my masculine, showing up in what's feminine, understanding what is healthy about those things, those are things that apply in multiple arenas, not just in trying to decide who should be able to preach at church, right? Like, and that's kind of why I want to focus on that, because I actually think as you build that out, it's a much stronger foundation than to have those other conversations, about those things, right? It's coming from a more substantial place rather than a presumptuous space, right? So that's what I kind of wanted to do with this. And
All
so
right, let's dig into it.
yeah. So let's check out Genesis 3. And the question is,
how much time do we have?
We
have like 15 minutes.
10
Okay.
minutes to just get started.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's just read it. And I think kind of where we left off was was a couple things that I remember. One of them was the Rabba. The word for increase is actually saying Rabba 3 times. So it's very much about increase, which I think is interesting about woman. That's how God speaks to her. And then also just kind of the preeminence of woman in the narrative, how really the woman takes over the narrative for the text, and what we might learn about when femininity goes wrong, right? Like from the text. So
we're not going to have a lot of time.
Yeah, so maybe just read it and
because once we read it, that's going to take up our time.
Yeah,
and right, all of Genesis 3. But but I do want to touch on something that you said.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Because you when you were talking about, here's the Bible, God gives it to us and figure it out. Right. And so I think what God did was just incredible by breathing. He breathed in these he breathed in his spirit, right, into the people who actually wrote these stories down. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at the whole Bible, what we're looking at is God provided stories with human interaction, right? People interacting with each other. And now you, the reader, you look at it and you learn from it, right? You use a lens of love your neighbor, do unto others the way you would want somebody to do to you, right? And so that, when we use this lens of love and we go deep, let's say, into certain scripture and we look at the Greek and the Hebrew and all that kind of stuff, that's great. And I think that there is a new thing that God is doing. He doesn't want us to stay stuck in those stories. He's doing a new thing, and he's using those stories for us to learn from and say, okay, I am being completely transparent. This is the vulnerable places. These are the mistakes people have made. Now
Right.
learn from it and
Right.
do better. Do love your neighbor better.
Right.
Yeah, and Jesus said it too. He said when they were asking him what's the greatest commandment, he said basically love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He said they are both equal, not like one as second. He said the second is like that, and he said on all this is the law and the prophets built. So I was reading Mere Christianity just 2 days ago by C.S. Lewis. And then he was talking about a Christian society. So he said that one of the things he has seen is that whenever you want to talk about a Christian society, you have people who are like really conservative, and we have people that are very liberal. So he said the conservative, they have some part of Christianity and some part of God that they love. And they want to emphasize that. He said the liberals too, they have some part of Christianity and of Christ that they love. And they want to emphasize that. And there's always that push and pull. But he says that if you really want to have a Christian society, you have to accept everything.
Mm-hmm.
So what you said is very important. When we're reading the Bible, we have to read it with the eye of love, because you said it's about love and God is love. But it has to also be love for God and love for one another. So many times when you make a mistake and just turn it to love for God, you might forget the second one. And when you turn it to love for one another, you might forget the first one. And that is what is happening right now. In our society, we just pick some part that we want. We need to accept both. In this understanding that God is both righteous and just.
Yes.
It's not just, and those things are related. It's righteous and it's just. He has certain standards, that have to do with the way we live our lives in terms of in relation to him. And he also asks in the way we relate to one another. If we separate it from one another, we're either going to become the Taliban or we're going to become somebody, the other one. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
No, that's good. I have a spiritual practice that I guess you would say this is my personal spiritual practice, right? It's not something I've learned somewhere. This is me. And when the weather is nice in Michigan, I like to sit outside on the ground in the grass, right? And I have what I call my daily love infusions. And that's when I just pause, I am still, and I am completely honest with God and say, I need your love. I need your love to just infuse me, every fiber of my being. I need, and so I sit there and I receive love, and I don't think, I try not to think about anything else. I try to imagine, God's love for me, and I try to imagine it bigger than I did the day before. And that enlarges how what happens. The fruit is that it enlarges this cavity that I had of whatever, it maybe not love. I can feel the difference within me. I can feel the difference of love. And the fruit then is that I'm able to see my situations with love. I am able to see people that I wasn't able to see before with more love, right? And so when I don't do it, when I don't practice that myself, or every day, if I'm not practicing that, I know it, because I could feel that cavity kind of calcifying and hardening. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I think I need to take a few moments here, because I'm not feeling the love within me. And it's not like I need to feel the love. I need to feel like I need to love you. I have done it so often that I can recognize when that cavity calcifies, that I want to exert some pride. I want to exert maybe a little bit superiority, right? And I think that is the tension, because, the Bible does talk about pausing, meditate on my word, be still within me, within my power, right? And so thank you for bringing that in, Pastor Lon, right? Because it's the love of God that empowers us to rectify, to repair, to apologize, to reconcile, to redo systems, redo how we even approach the Bible, right? If I am not approaching the Bible with love, what are we going to get from it? We're going to get legalism. We're going to get, all these policies and rules and whatever. So,
so ladies, Susie is right now putting together a cohort. You just saw why it might be a good thing to be a part of it, so you can hang out with her. That's beautiful, sister. I needed to hear that just for my own. I don't know about you, Pastor Lon, the more I'm in ministry, just how quickly it becomes about power and who's going to choose to do what. And it's infuriating. It's like, and you find it in your own heart, right? Because you're trying to decide what to do with the resources. Like, that's all of life, right? You just can't get away from that. And then you bring people together and they don't agree about how we're supposed to spend our time, energy, money, and navigating that in love. Oh, it's so hard. But like what you're talking about, Susie, it's why, like, when we go into hard meetings, I always try to pray for an hour.
Yeah.
We start.
Yeah.
So that everybody's focused on Jesus and not what they're mad about that the other person did in the room, right? Because it's exactly what you just said. It's just, you can feel it in your heart when you're in kind of power mode and get my way mode, because it's the smartest thing versus, wow, I love these people, and I just want things to be good for them, right? Like, that is such a great litmus test. Like, am I showing up in this space loving the people here? If I'm not, like, this probably isn't gonna go well, I love that, Susie. I love that. That is amazing stuff.
Thank you. Well, and it takes time. It takes, like, that's why I practice it, and I try to practice it every day, because it's building something within me and it's tearing down at the same time, right? There's a transformation that is happening. And there are many times I need to apologize, and that's a part of the process too, right? To be able to for me to be able to deliver an authentic apology to someone, that is love. It doesn't, right? So I don't always have to get it right. But if it comes to mind, if something comes to mind where I have dishonored someone in some way, that's a part of this process as well.
Yeah.
That's a good.
All right, that's great femininity. Great
That's a great last word. A great last word for today. So, hey, I'm glad we're getting back into this.
Yeah. No, I'm going to be traveling for the next 2 weeks, so
Okay.
I won't be available the next 2 weeks. I'm so sorry.
Okay. All right. That's fine. And then we'll get started. And then I think we're going to start incorporating like guest panelists, basically, so that we get some more voices in the interaction with us, just across the board. So all of us, you have free reign to invite somebody. Let us know. I think we could get up to 2 extra people and still have a productive conversation, so we can look forward to that. So, all right. Well, Pastor Lan, you have a hard stop, I know, so we'll let you go.
All right.
So good to be with you.
Great being together, guys.
Yeah.
Looking forward to next time. See you in a few weeks.
All right.
Blessings to everybody.
All right.